The conference room fell silent when Calvin cut me off mid-sentence, his voice slicing through the air like a dull knife. "Amanda, your cost-saving ideas are quaint," he said, that smirk spreading across his face, revealing perfectly whitened teeth that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "But we need modern solutions, not outdated methods from someone who clearly doesn't understand today's market." The room erupted in nervous laughter, a chorus of awkward chuckles from colleagues I'd worked with for years. My presentation slides glowed uselessly on the screen behind me, charts I'd spent nights perfecting now reduced to props in a show. Heat crawled up my neck, a burning flush that made my collar feel too tight, as 20 pairs of eyes watched my humiliation unfold. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your cheeks, and sat down, my hands trembling with rage beneath the table. In that moment, staring at Calvin's satisfied expression, his tailored suit immaculate, tie knotted just so, I made myself a promise. He would pay for this. Not with petty pranks or office gossip, but with something calculated, something that would strip away his facade. The room buzzed back to life, but my mind was already plotting, the seeds of revenge taking root in the fertile soil of my anger. Just before you continue to watch, Feminine Revenge would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage us to keep this streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. Back at my desk, surrounded by the hum of keyboards and the faint scent of stale coffee from the break room, I couldn't concentrate on anything except Calvin's condescending tone echoing in my head. The man was all flash and no substance, expensive watches, slick hair, but his eyes always darted when questioned too closely. His presentations were polished, sure, but something about his numbers never felt right. They were too clean, too perfect, like a puzzle with no rough edges. I pulled up his last quarterly report on my computer, the screen casting a blue glow on my face. Everything looked pristine at first glance, rows of figures aligning neatly. But as I dug deeper, cross-referencing with our database, one tiny discrepancy caught my eye. A logistics cost that didn't match our actual vendor payments, off by just a few $100s. It was small, maybe a rounding error. Or maybe it wasn't. My pulse quickened, a thrill mixing with the lingering sting of humiliation. This crack might be bigger than it appeared, a thread I could pull to unravel his whole tapestry of lies. I bookmarked the file, my fingers steady now, determination replacing the tremble. That evening, I stayed late in the empty office, the only light coming from my monitor and the occasional flicker of the motion sensor fluorescence. The cleaning crew moved quietly through the cubicles, their vacuums a distant hum as I combed through months of Calvin's reports. Patterns started emerging from the data like ghosts in the fog, round numbers that should have been messy from real-world fluctuations, supply costs that seemed inflated beyond market rates, balance sheets that aligned too perfectly, as if scripted. I took screenshots and made detailed notes in an encrypted file on my personal drive, my excitement growing with each inconsistency. This wasn't sloppy work or honest mistakes. It was deliberate, like a magician's sleight of hand. Someone was being very deliberate about making these numbers look good. The question burned in my mind. Who was Calvin trying to fool, and what was he hiding? A minor setback hit when the system logged me out for inactivity, forcing me to re-enter credentials and lose a bit of progress, but it only fueled my resolve. As the clock ticked past midnight, I realized this could be bigger than personal grudge. It could be fraud. The next morning, fueled by strong coffee from the corner cafe with its quirky chalkboard specials, I approached Mia, one of the junior analysts who worked with Calvin's team. She was at her desk, surrounded by sticky notes and a potted succulent that looked as overworked as she did. "Hey, quick question about the quarterly data formatting," I said casually, leaning against her cubicle wall. She glanced around nervously, her eyes darting to Calvin's closed office door, before leaning closer. "Between you and me," she whispered, her voice barely above the whir of the printer nearby, "Calvin always gives me adjusted numbers to input. Says it makes the reports cleaner." My heart hammered in my chest, a drumbeat of validation. "Adjusted how?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She shrugged uncomfortably. fiddling with her mouse. Just different from what comes from accounting. He says it's for presentation purposes. I nodded and walked away, my mind racing like a high-speed train. I wasn't imagining things. Someone else had noticed Calvin's creative accounting too. A small humorous thought crossed my mind. Calvin, the modern thinker, relying on old-school fudging. The breakthrough came during Wednesday's department meeting, held in the stuffy conference room with its perpetual smell of dry erase markers. Calvin bragged about cutting our vendor costs by 15% this quarter, his PowerPoint slides flashing impressive graphs. It's all about negotiation skills, he said, shooting me a pointed look across the table cluttered with notepads and coffee cups. Some people just don't have the backbone for tough conversations. But I'd spoken to our main supplier that very morning about a delayed shipment, their voice crackling over the phone line. They hadn't mentioned any price reductions. In fact, they complained about Calvin pushing for faster delivery on the same terms, grumbling about unchanged rates. Our eyes locked across the conference table, his smug grin meeting my steady gaze. For just a second, his confident smirk faltered, a micro-expression of panic. That tiny crack in his armor told me everything I needed to know. He knew I was onto something. As the meeting wrapped, a colleague's awkward joke about backbone exercises lightened the tension briefly, but my mind was fixed on the hunt. I spent my lunch breaks in the records room, a dimly lit archive in the basement with rows of dusty filing cabinets and the faint musty scent of old paper. Pulling archived invoices and payment confirmations, I sifted through stacks, my fingers smudged with ink. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Calvin's reports didn't match the actual payments we'd made to vendors. The discrepancies weren't small rounding errors. They were systematic overcharges that added up to tens of thousands of dollars. Money that should have stayed in our budget was disappearing somewhere, perhaps into his pockets. I photographed every relevant document with my phone, building a digital trail that would be impossible to deny, organizing them into folders labeled by date. A setback came when I realized some files were restricted, requiring IT approval that could tip off Calvin, so I had to work around it creatively, cross-referencing public ledgers. The evidence was damning, but I needed to be smart about how I used it. Timing was everything in this game of corporate chess. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the defeated employee, a mask I'd perfected from years in male-dominated meetings. I laughed at Calvin's jokes in the break room, endured his subtle digs about my outdated thinking during casual chats, and let him believe he'd broken my spirit. Meanwhile, I worked late every night, the office turning ghostly quiet after 7 p.m., building my secret file. Email chains showing his directives, supplier confirmations contradicting his reports, payment records with glaring gaps, timeline documents mapping the fraud. Each piece of evidence fit perfectly into a pattern of deliberate fraud, like puzzle pieces snapping together. The irony was delicious. While Calvin thought he'd humiliated me into submission, I was methodically constructing his downfall. Every condescending comment he made, like calling my coffee mug vintage with a wink, just added fuel to my determination, turning anger into cold precision. A minor emotional low hit when doubt crept in. Was I risking my job? But I pushed through, reminding myself of that initial humiliation. The trigger moment came during Friday's team meeting, the room packed with stressed faces and the aroma of takeout pizza someone had ordered. We were discussing next quarter's budget when Calvin made another dig. Maybe Amanda should stick to filing, he said with that same smirk, leaning back in his chair like a king. Leave the real analysis to people who understand numbers. The room filled with uncomfortable laughter again, a few sympathetic glances my way. I smiled back, completely calm this time, sipping my water to hide my amusement. Because by then, my presentation was ready, my evidence bulletproof, and I knew exactly when I'd use it. Calvin had no idea he'd just signed his own termination papers. The quarterly board review was coming up in 2 weeks, a high-stakes event in our sleek downtown office with its glass walls. Perfect timing, his arrogance would be his undoing. As the meeting ended, a colleague whispered, "Ignore him," but I just nodded, plodding. I started dropping subtle comments to trusted colleagues, careful not to overplay my hand. Strange how our vendor costs look so different on paper than in reality. I mentioned to Thomas from accounting over coffee in the kitchen, where the microwave hummed eternally. He raised an eyebrow, stirring his sugar. Have you noticed some inconsistencies in the quarterly reports? I asked Rebecca from procurement during a hallway chat, her arms full of supply catalogs. I never accused Calvin directly, just planted seeds of curiosity, like a gardener sowing doubt. Within days, whispers were spreading through the office, the grapevine alive with murmurs during lunch breaks in the cafeteria with its view of the city's skyline. People started looking more closely at numbers they'd previously accepted without question, pulling files themselves. Calvin remained oblivious, too drunk on his own ego to notice the ground shifting beneath his feet, still strutting around like the office alpha. The Whisper Network was doing my work for me, amplifying the suspense. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening as I was packing up to leave, my desk lamp casting long shadows. One of our suppliers sounded confused and frustrated on the line, his voice gravelly from years in the business. "I'm calling about these extra service charges Calvin added to our invoice," he said. "We never agreed to those fees, and frankly, we're not even sure what services they're supposed to cover." My stomach dropped, not in fear, but excitement, like finding the missing key. This wasn't just internal number manipulation. Calvin was running side deals with our vendors, pocketing kickbacks perhaps. I took detailed notes on my notepad, my hand shaking with adrenaline. This evidence could destroy him completely. A humorous twist. The supplier joked about Calvin's creative billing like a bad accountant comedy. The man who'd humiliated me was about to learn what real consequences looked like, his web of lies tangling around him. I needed allies for what came next, so I confided in Mia and Thomas in a quiet corner booth at the nearby diner, away from office ears. Showing them carefully selected pieces of evidence, printouts of discrepancies and vendor emails. Their reactions were everything I'd hoped for. Shock widening their eyes, anger flushing their faces. "This is fraud," Thomas said, his face pale as he reviewed the vendor discrepancies over his sandwich. "We have to report this." Mia nodded vigorously, pushing aside her salad. "He's been making me falsify data for months. I thought it was just presentation stuff, but this..." A setback arose when Mia worried about her job security, hesitating briefly, but I reassured her with the evidence's strength. We spent the evening triple-checking every piece, making sure our case was airtight, coffee going cold. This had evolved beyond personal revenge. We were protecting the entire company from a criminal, a subplot of team solidarity emerging. The announcement came the following Monday via company email, the ping echoing in the open plan office. The board would conduct quarterly performance reviews for all department heads in 2 weeks, in the executive suite with its panoramic views. Calvin practically glowed with anticipation, bragging in the hallway about how he'd dazzle them again with real results, his cologne overpowering. I just smiled and nodded, filing papers on my desk. That review session would be his stage and mine. The beauty of it was perfect timing. He'd present his fabricated success story to the board, and then I'd systematically tear it apart with irrefutable evidence. 2 weeks to prepare my presentation, sharpening slides like blades. The man who'd called my methods outdated was about to discover just how thoroughly modern my revenge could be, a cliffhanger building as I anticipated his fall. Calvin's arrogance reached new heights as the review date approached, his emails barking orders with increasing condescension. "Don't bother preparing backup materials," he told me when I offered to help with his presentation during a quick stand-up meeting. "You wouldn't understand the complexity of my numbers anyway." I nodded meekly, biting back a laugh, while inside, I was roaring with amusement. Because while he was polishing his slides and rehearsing his lies in front of his mirror at home, I was preparing my own presentation, a detailed expose of every fraudulent transaction, every falsified report, every stolen dollar. He thought I was harmless, a broken employee who'd learned her place after that public shaming. He couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong about what I was capable of, underestimating me like so many before. A light humor in his overconfidence, he even joked about promoting me to coffee runs, oblivious to the irony. The final pieces of evidence came together beautifully, like the last turns of a Rubik's Cube. I contacted 3 vendors directly from my home office, asking innocent questions about their billing processes with our company over polite emails. 2 of them confirmed that Calvin had been adding unauthorized charges to their invoices, one even forwarding receipts showing the difference between what they'd billed and what Calvin had reported internally. My file was now bulletproof, a comprehensive record of systematic fraud that no lawyer could argue against, stored securely on a cloud drive. All I needed was the perfect moment to reveal it to the people who mattered most, the board of directors. A minor setback. One vendor hesitated, fearing backlash, but I assured anonymity, sealing the deal. The city lights twinkled outside my window as I reviewed it all, satisfaction warming me like fine wine. The night before the review, Calvin held court at the office happy hour in the rooftop lounge, his usual crowd of admirers hanging on his every word amid clinking glasses. "Some people just don't have what it takes for this level of responsibility," he said loudly, glancing at me with that smirk. She couldn't find a calculator if it hit her in the face. Laughter rippled, but it was thinner now. I sipped my wine slowly, smiled, and said nothing, the cool evening breeze ruffling my hair. But inside, I was savoring the moment, a quiet thrill of anticipation. Tomorrow, those words would taste like poison in his mouth. Tomorrow, everyone in that room would know exactly who could handle responsibility and who is nothing but a well-dressed fraud. Emotional tension built as I reflected on months of swallowed pride, but hope flickered. Justice was near. Review day arrived with perfect autumn weather, golden leaves swirling outside the high-rise. The boardroom buzzed with nervous energy as department heads prepared their presentations, the long table polished to a shine. Calvin went first, of course, dazzling the directors with his slick slides and confident delivery, voice booming. Charts showed impressive cost savings, efficiency improvements, and profit margins that drew impressed nods. Heads nodded approvingly around the mahogany table, murmurs of "well done." I sat quietly in the back row, my laptop bag beside me, waiting for my moment like a coiled spring. Calvin's presentation was flawless, a masterpiece of deception that would make his downfall even more spectacular. When he finished to enthusiastic applause, straightening his tie smugly, I knew my time had come, the suspense peaking. "Impressive work, Calvin," the board chair said, adjusting her glasses. "These vendor cost reductions are particularly noteworthy." That's when board member Jessica Williams frowned at her notes, her pen tapping. "Actually, I'm curious about this 15% reduction with Morrison Supply. That seems significant." Calvin's confident smile flickered for just a second, a bead of sweat forming. I raised my hand calmly. "I can clarify that figure if it would help," I said, standing with my laptop, heels clicking on the floor. "I've been working closely with our vendor relationships." The room's attention shifted to me, a wave of curiosity. Calvin's face went pale as he realized I wasn't sitting silently in the background anymore, his control slipping. "Amanda, this isn't," he started, but the chair waved him off, intrigued. I connected my laptop to the boardroom's display system with steady hands, the projector humming to life. "I'd like to present some additional context for Calvin's numbers," I said, my voice clear and professional, echoing slightly. The first slide showed Calvin's reported vendor costs alongside the actual invoices I'd photographed, red highlights marking the gaps. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore, thousands off here, inflated there. Murmurs spread around the table as the directors absorbed the information, leaning forward. Calvin tried to interrupt, his chair scraping. "Amanda, I don't think," but my voice cut through his stammering, louder and more confident than I'd ever sounded in this room. "With your permission, I'd like to walk through several examples," I continued, advancing slides. A touch of situational humor. One director chuckled nervously at a particularly glaring error, breaking the tension briefly. By the 5th side-by-side comparison, Calvin's face had drained completely of color, his tie suddenly looking too tight. The evidence was overwhelming. Fabricated savings, inflated costs, money that had simply vanished from the company's accounts into unknown voids. Board member Thompson leaned forward, his voice sharp with anger, bushy eyebrows furrowed. Calvin, do you deny these discrepancies? Calvin opened his mouth, then closed it again, fumbling for words. There might be some administrative errors, he mumbled weakly. But no one was buying his excuses anymore. The numbers spoke for themselves, cold and unyielding. I wasn't finished, though. The vendor-side deals were my killing blow, a twist he'd never see coming. The fraud was about to get much worse for Calvin Morrison, the room thick with tension as eyes bored into him. There's one more element the board should know about, I said, advancing to my final slides with a click. Several vendors have reported unauthorized charges added to their invoices. I displayed the supplier emails and receipts, showing exactly how Calvin had been skimming money through fake service fees, arrows pointing to the damning figures. Gasps filled the boardroom, a collective intake of breath. Calvin slumped in his chair, finally speechless, his hands gripping the table edge, white-knuckled. Board Chair Williams' fury was unmistakable as she processed the full scope of the fraud, her lips a thin line. Mr. Morrison, she said icily, you'll need to clear out your office immediately. Security will escort you. The man who'd called my methods outdated was finished, his empire crumbling in real time. Security arrived within minutes, 2 uniformed guards standing stoically at the door. I watched Calvin gather his personal items under their supervision, photos, a fancy pen set, his hands shaking as reality set in, dropping a stapler with a clatter. The boardroom fell silent after he left, the air heavy. Chair Williams turned to me with an expression I'd never seen directed my way before, respect, genuine and hard-earned. Ms. Anderson, she said, how long have you known about these irregularities? I met her gaze steadily, chin high. Long enough to be absolutely certain of the evidence before bringing it forward. The other directors nodded approvingly, murmuring, professional. Thorough. Exactly the qualities Calvin had claimed I lacked. Their next words would change my career forever, a sweet emotional high washing over me. The board wants to thank you for protecting our company's integrity, Williams said, her voice carrying authority. Your investigation prevented significant financial losses and potential legal liability. The other directors murmured their agreement, one even applauding softly. We'd like you to temporarily oversee Calvin's department while we conduct a formal search for his replacement. Applause filled the boardroom. Genuine recognition for work well done, echoing off the walls. I felt tears prick my eyes but kept my voice steady, blinking them back. I'm honored by your confidence. This was everything I dreamed of when Calvin had humiliated me in front of my peers. Respect, recognition, and the chance to prove my worth. A light humor. One director joked about my detective skills rivaling TV shows, lightening the mood. I found Calvin by his car in the parking garage an hour later, the concrete echoing with his muttered curses as he loaded boxes with shaking hands. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, his eyes full of rage and defeat, suit rumpled now. You ruined me, he spat, slamming a box down. I'll never work in this industry again. I looked him straight in the eye, feeling completely calm for the first time in months, the dim lights casting shadows. No, Calvin, I said quietly, voice even. You ruined yourself when you decided to steal from this company. I just gave the truth a microphone. He had no words left, mouth opening and closing like a fish. The man who'd built his career on smooth talking and confident lies was finally speechless, turning away defeated. Word of Calvin's termination spread through the office like wildfire, emails pinging and whispers in huddles by the water cooler. Colleagues who'd laughed at his jokes now avoided mentioning his name, shifting uncomfortably. People who dismissed my ideas suddenly wanted to discuss my insights over lunch, crowding my desk. Mia stopped by my desk that afternoon, her eyes bright with relief, hugging a folder. You saved all of us, she whispered. He was making everyone complicit in his fraud. I exhaled deeply, feeling years of tension leave my shoulders. A weight lifted. The whisper network that had helped build Calvin's reputation was now spreading the truth about what kind of manager he really was, justice served organically. At the next all-hands meeting in the auditorium, with its rows of chairs and big screen, Chair Williams introduced me to the entire company. "I want you to meet the woman who saw what others missed and had the courage to speak truth to power," she announced, microphone amplifying her words. The applause was thunderous, genuine recognition from people who finally understood my value, standing ovation rippling. I glanced at Calvin's empty chair on the stage and felt the sweetest satisfaction I'd ever experienced, a warm glow. This was my revenge, not just destroying the man who'd humiliated me, but proving that patience and precision could be the sharpest weapons of all. Sometimes the best way to bring someone to the ground is simply to let them dig their own grave and watch as they fall in. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Feminine Revenge has got more thrilling stories for you.